Hello and welcome to the J plus R movie podcast. And this week we will be returning to the Western genre. Previously we covered Fistful of Dollars, and now we're going to be covering Unforgiven, which was Clint Eastwood's return to the Western genre, and to date his last Western as well. It follows a retired outlaw named William Money, who said to have been quite a vicious, cold-hearted killer, thief, and outlaw in his younger days, but has settled down. He's a farmer. He has a wife that supposedly helped him that's currently dead. All of that changes when a prostitute is scarred. There's basically this bounty to catch the two men who basically took part in doing it because they've evaded justice. He eventually takes it up with his old partner Ned, and they're accompanied by the Schofield kid. What it then turns into is not only a journey to kill these two, but also exploration of the past and history and all of these previous events and how they then collide in the present, and comments in, very much William basically facing off against Little Bill, who's the sheriff of the town that's basically the big bad and the one responsible for all of the stuff that's taking place, including these two escaping justice. It's one of Clint Eastwood's best movies. What's really interesting about it is when you view it in the context of his prior westerns, because this does feel like he's returning to the genre that he basically helped popularize. It's obviously been referred to as a revisionist western. I see it as almost like a deconstruction.
I would call this the ultimate deconstructionist western. It's got the template of like western would be. You get the outlaw character, they have a mission where they team up with one or two extra outlaws that you're not sure if you can trust one of them, and one of them they're mates with, or they say no, and they're all after a very specific goal. What's interesting about it is that right from the start, it completely takes the character of the Western gunslinger. I think using Clint Eastwood was probably the smartest choice they made, because he's probably one of the most heroic and powerful Western figures that you'd think of. You think of him as the ultimate outlaw, the essential cowboy, and he just fails at it. The one scene kind of sets you up knowing that it's not going to be like the others is when you watch him trying to get on his horse to ride away from the kids. He just can't get on the horse. The horse just keeps riding away and he keeps jumping it because he's not done it in a while.
It takes him a while to even be able to shoot properly as well.
Yeah, and from that opening, the Western gunslinger is going to be challenged. The myth of it is going to be torn down, and the amount of realism in the film as well. Characters get sick, but properly sick was quite a rare thing.
Specifically, William Money gets a fever from the cold rain and then the beating that he endures as well. You say it's set up from when we properly see William Money. I think it's even set up from the very opening of the film, because it opens in quite a disturbing fashion, because it's actually showing the bit where Delilah gets scarred, and it's really, really horrific. It's shown in a decent amount of detail, cutting her up and stuff. I mean, A, obviously it's a man hurting a woman, but B, it's also sex workers being horrifically abused. What makes it even more effective is when we get a demonstration of the fact that Little Bill is not bringing these guys to justice, and all he basically wants from them is just horses, and that's it. That's all they have to give him in return. They're not being sent to jail at all. So it's very much a world where justice is not being served. In some ways, William Money is the kind of man who would have probably been just like that in his younger days. So that makes watching him then do this bounty and technically avenge this a bit more interesting.
I'd agree with that. I think having William Money always go after the kind of man that he was, but better, is quite an interesting thing, because it takes the clear moral line that you usually get. Wandering stranger coming into town and then saving that town is the classic thing of what it is. Not only was William Money a lot more like the bad guys in a classic Western, coming into a town, shooting up and just leaving it dead. He doesn't really care who he shoots or what he does. That's very much the vibe you get from Money. And I think having him step in and almost reflecting on the kind of person that would even be the person who rode into town in the first place, quite interesting. And you can see it in the kid as well. The kid's I'm going to be the best outlaw the world's ever seen. I'm going to ride into any town, kill any man I want, sleep with anyone I want. That's kind of what he's like. But the kid's never shot anyone.
Yeah, and he makes up the fact that he'd killed 5 people when he's never killed anyone. He's killed the second guy and he's just broken. His bravado is just demolished, and he's just feeling awful because he's never killed anyone and now experiencing what that's like.
The facade, everything around him breaks, and he's just never want to do that again. And you literally just see William Money, who's clearly actually killed someone 100 times, giving him the whiskey, and he's just, and I think that whole speech as well, in a normal Western, you're not meant to think about the people who are being shot. Not really. Maybe one of them, and then everyone else is cannon fodder. This film makes you feel every single person that gets killed. Feels like an impactful death. It feels heavy. It feels mean. I think that's the attitude this film nails. Especially the way people die as well, because it's actually quite often not in a fair gunfight, like a lot of the westerns were. It's especially the way the kid kills a guy. I mean, he shoots a guy on the toilet. That's what he does.
Yeah.
Or you get people sniped before they even know what's going on.
Maybe at the end, it comes close to being somewhat fair. William Money is in like the bar, and it's like, him versus Little Bill and all the other guys around him. Comes closer to being like a classic duel. It's not good versus evil. It's still not really fair at the end of the day. There really is no sense of fairness in either of them. The only thing that is fair is the whole revenge aspect for them killing Ned. Even then, that's very personal. There is no moral.
There's no order in any of the killing of this film, and I think that's a really powerful thing. It's almost like one of the most pacifistic westerns. Take out the the hero aspect, the myth aspect, and it becomes men who can kill, and it's uncomfortable and it's nasty. Even William Money, like the guy that's done 100 times, needs to get drunk. If he's gonna shoot and kill effectively, he had to get drunk because, like throughout the film, he doesn't really kill people. He's very much against doing it. He's like, oh, I promised my wife I did this, I did that. And then that last scene is when the whiskey comes back again. And that's when he can do it.
It's a bit reluctant when he takes the gun from Ned and does fire. And even then, you don't know if he was necessarily even aiming to kill or if he was just shooting and he just so happened to kill him. And then I think finally when he's told that Ned is dead, that's when finally he starts to like transform. The man who he used to be actually comes back. You just see it in general with like the way he's reacting. Like that anger is coming back. That kind of vicious, murderous anger. He's not crying, he's not sobbing, or he's not really grieving.
He's not hesitating. He's just going and doing something. And throughout the film, he's not been like that. He's been concerned. He's been weary. He's not wanted to go in. He's been hesitating.
He's even been like a decent man towards his kids, towards Delilah as well. Like, they have that entire conversation about how he doesn't want to have sex with her, but it's all because of his sense of like honor and him lying about the fact that his wife is still alive and stuff like that. So you've seen him at his best, but then at the ending of it, he ditches that completely and he's just kind of a monster once again. It's really effective and chilling because the action is kind of scattered throughout the film.
It's very much a film about the psychology of the people in it and the way that they respond to the myth of the legendary outlaw, of the cowboy. It's very much the way they respond to the myth of the Western. It takes away the story and the romance completely. Like, there's no romance to the film. It's just hired killers doing things and paying their prices. People that have moved on from it, moved on as the times were moving on, getting sucked back into it, and it gets them either killed or it kills the part of them that they want to be.
You kind of see how some of the more modern characters react to it versus the older ones. One of the characters you could say is a bit more modern is the character of English Bob, but he's trying to invent himself as a person who's done a lot. He incorporates English Bob as the side character that comes into the story and then leaves it. But the reason why he comes in and leaves it is because he's almost trying to claim the place of the person who will go on this bounty and like collect this bounty. Immediately he's humiliated, he's arrested, he gets beaten, and it's kind of revealed that he's just a fake.
He's really made himself out to be this legend, this hero, this amazing thing. I mean, he shot most of them when they were either drunk or not able to defend themselves in other ways. It tears down that Western hero. The guy that's following him around, the almost enamored fan, the guy who wants to see the romance of it, is crushed by it. And then when he tries to transfer that onto William Money's just there like, it doesn't matter. It's not what it is.
You're talking about the writer as well.
It was quite a fascinating thing to have on there. You've got the writer of a classic Western and just scoffing at them.
Like, you have that sort of past versus present aspect. Again, with English Bob trying to say that he's like a legendary figure of the past when he's not. William Money kind of living up to his name. And even have Little Bill as well, because Little Bill is kind of in between. He's definitely a person who has done a lot and knows way more, but he's almost trying to like maintain his power, even when there are these like other figures that are coming in and are a bit more deserving of it than he is. What he kind of shows himself to be throughout the film is a totally selfish, violent lunatic who's just willing to kill whoever he wants to kill and beat whoever he wants to kill and beat.
Hides behind the law as a way to do it. He's not like a heroic sheriff carrying out his town and defending it. He's a corrupt bastard using law for his own purposes, however he wants.
You have all this character stuff, and it makes the film very engaging because it's giving you a lot to think about.
Both on a meta level and the kind of idea of the film itself, because it gives you an idea of really cruel, unforgiven world that isn't governed by anything. Like, the true idea of a Wild West. I think this is the most Wild West has ever felt. There's no guarantees in it. Things don't end happily. The day doesn't get saved. I mean, they've already failed the damsel in distress by 2 minutes in because she has her face sliced up and nobody does shit about it.
The way that Clint directs it as well is that he actually doesn't put a lot of focus on himself, gives quite a lot of time to the individual characters and not just him. It's only really in the second half when he gets a lot more prominence. But in the first bit, he's in the movie, but it's also about these other people, and even gives a lot of time to the prostitutes as well, when they could have just been kind of in the background as well. He gives loads of time to the people. And that could have just come naturally from the script. But it's interesting because he doesn't glamorize himself. He doesn't make himself seem like a godlike figure. Even the historical aspect that they're kind of hinting at is a bad one. It's definitely one of the least egotistical actor-director examples that I've ever seen.
He doesn't care about making himself look good. That's the film's credit because it just seals that world in further. Just seals in that not even Clint Eastwood is the legendary hero type. He's not even Clint Eastwood is necessarily doing the right thing. Not even Clint Eastwood is what a Western normally looks like. I think what it has over things like the spaghetti Westerns and other revisionist Westerns is they try and do it with the darker themes and grittiness. And this film is, it's dark and gritty. It is all of that as well. But what this film takes a step ahead of doing is it challenges the basic assumptions in a way that a lot of others don't. I also think this film is shot spectacularly.
Some of the cinematography is really beautiful, especially I think when they're riding on the horse and you get the sun. It is really beautiful to look at.
Contrast of that with some of the other scenes as well, because it's dirty and you get a lot of close-ups of some of the nastier things just shown in full view. I always think at the bar at the end of just the horrific darkness and shadow over the whole thing.
And the rain as well. When it comes into the film, it's a big setting of atmosphere.
There's a great use of special effects in that moment as well. The rain looks real, it sounds right, it sets the tone, I think, better than a lot of things do.
It's shot really well. I think the color tone helps with the grittiness of it as well, because it's not a colorful film. There's also not a huge absence of color. There's not a gray filter applied to the image. You compare it to an old spaghetti western. Spaghetti westerns pop a lot more. It's also just fitting with the age as well. Clinton, he did this movie when he was 62 or something like that, entered into being an old man, dealing with this not from the perspective of maybe what he would have done when he was younger. I mean, obviously he didn't direct the Dollars trilogy, but it's interesting that this is how he tackles it. Not only being far removed from a trilogy, but also even further removed from the westerns that he directed himself. He's done it all, and he's coming back one last time, and he's looking at it from an aged perspective. And I think that's conveyed quite well in the direction.
There's a sense of weariness to the film. There's a sense of tiredness to the film. Also a reference. I think it's that balance that makes the film so effective, because throughout, deference to the legend, everyone's like, oh man, you're this guy, you're so tough, you're so all of this. And he's just there like, I did what I did, I am what I am. It's not what I am anymore. Him stepping in to be that and to show someone like that could become, and the shelf life of it is really quite interesting. Because people have also seen the Western genre, especially at that time, as a beaten old horse. It's something that doesn't need to be done anymore. And that film both made the case for and against it by showing a new way that you could do it, while at the same time realizing what about it felt old and tired.
This came out after the genre had a little bit of a resurgence, and this definitely heavily continued it. I do think that genre was on its way out in the 70s.
You've still got westerns that can be successful being made now.
Unless it's kind of a homage, there'll never be that classic spaghetti western movie. It'll always be a bit evolved beyond what it used to traditionally be. Directors like Clint Eastwood helped with that transition. Tarantino definitely helped to bring back the genre with Django and The Hateful Eight, but even then he took very different approaches. So even the most homage Western will still be different.
I think what this film did was it killed off the old idea of Western completely by making it in the new way. Effectively, he made a classic Western in such an unclassic way that he killed the very idea of a classic Western.
That is really interesting because he was kind of the guy who helped popularize it from the beginning. It's great on that view alone. It's really interesting. But even if you take that stuff aside, it's almost one that you can still watch as part of the other ones that Eastwood starred in, and kind of see it as an evolution. This is the final form of it. It would have been really interesting for viewers who had actually seen all of Eastwood's films in the cinema, all of the westerns that he did, and then seeing this film. I can't imagine what that would have been like.
It probably would have been at once interesting and disconcerting. You like watching something you're so familiar with just be so different.
The acting, I think, is great.
Phenomenal.
The actors do feel quite challenged. Morgan Freeman as Ned is impotent in the film. Like, he's not really the authority figure. He's a bit useless in an intentional way.
He's almost the guy that talks a big game but can't put it up. He's almost like the guy who's romanticised his past but hasn't been with it and may never really been that with it. He's talked a lot about Eastwood's performance already, to be fair. You get that tender, soft old man. But he's not soft because he can't be it. He's soft because he was softened and he doesn't go back to being that. And you get that, really ruthless outlaw. And it's not like it was back in the day where it was just the king of cool. It was just, it's a monster.
There is something about his performance at the end when he's in the bar and he appears for the first time.
Yeah.
You can just tell that something has emerged. And
it looks like he's not in the driver's seat anymore. Something else is driving him and he's just the vessel.
It's conveyed really well in his acting. And if you see that in him, you see it in like Morgan Freeman, the way that he plays as well. For me personally, it's hard to even pick a standout. I think Gene Hackman does an amazing job as Little Bill.
Yeah.
He is like quite charismatic, but he's also again quite vicious, which is a good line for any villain to toe. It's the scene when English Bob is in the prison cell. In that scene, he stands out quite a lot because he's absolutely tearing down English Bob and trying to goad him into shooting when he knows that he can't or knows that he won't, because English Bob values his own life too much. Very like threatening scene, and the way he like plays it is just so, it's manipulative and also threatening. There's something about the way Little Bill carries himself with honor, but at the same time also a bit of a lack of honor. Like, there is something very dishonorable about the guy, even though he does in a couple of occasions be a bit honorable. Like, he does face his own death with dignity.
It's very much like a guy who puts up the front and thinks of himself as something very heroic, very honorable. He thinks of himself as being the right thing because he's got the badge.
Yeah.
But he's also a massively unpleasant, selfish, nasty bit of work that clearly takes pleasure in killing people. Like, he displays Ned's coffin outside a saloon. Like, fucking hell.
And part of his excuse as to why he shouldn't die is because, like, he's a man who is building a house. He does have that modest quality about him, but it's very mild when you compare it to all of the stuff that he's done. He's not a normal, modest man. He probably thinks of himself as such, but he really, really isn't. And you just see that conveyed really well in his performance. I think it's one where even some of the supporting roles are very well acted too. The actor who plays the Schofield kid does a really good job, especially again in that scene. I think if you want to highlight great acting, I would say in the scene where William and the kid, like, they're both told that Ned is dead. I think in that scene, all three performances are all excellent, but they're all excellent in different ways. We've already discussed how William is like reacting, and the Schofield kid is just like shocked. Even the woman who's telling the story is like clearly devastated and disturbed and upset.
You get that deep upset. You get, obviously, Eve was just slowly turning to rage and drink, and you get the shock. The kid's still in shock, and then he's a little bit devastated by it. And then you've got both of them kind of really scared, where it's just they're like, give me the gun. I'm going.
I really can only think of one issue I have with the film. It's not really a big problem. So I do like the beginning and the end, but use of text to explain stuff that happened in the past, and then at the end to give information of stuff that we're not seeing.
It's so good at showing for a lot of it. Like, you see them properly hunt down Quick Mike and Davy Bunting and put the bullets in them properly. And you see that in graphic detail. Then I was thinking about it some more. I think having it in text, it leaves it to your imagination. You don't actually know what any of them were like. And I think that does a lot more for putting you uncertain in the whole film as to what they're going to do, because you don't know who they are. You just know the stories. The stories are usually massively exaggerated or blown out of proportion or things like that. But then with some of them, you see them do things that's a bit like, oh, maybe it's not just a story. And it's almost scarier because you can see that they're capable of it.
Even though at the end it's somewhat important that you get an idea of what happened to William Money afterwards. But there is something that I did quite like about the final shot of him going back to his home and then him just kind of fading off. Like, there's something that I really like about that image, but I was a bit distracted because I had to read the text that was saying the mother of his wife returned, and there's the rumor that he works with like good. Could just be more that the text kind of distracted me from that image, because I do think that is quite a beautiful final image, just of him fading. Something quite powerful I found about that image.
Almost like myth is gone again, and it's almost like it's gone off into the sunset to go.
Came this man one last time and then I'm leaving it. On that basis, I guess it's okay to give us that text thing. Just that image alone just says so much.
I mean, I kind of agree with the ending, because I really don't care what happens to his kids. I don't care.
Yeah,
like,
obviously.
cool, you go back. But I think once he's almost gone back to that life, that's it. Like, that's all we see. He's done it, and it's faded off into the sunset. Like, that could have been, you know, he's done now, or that could be he's dead now, or he's done what needs to, whatever it is. There's a lot of things. I agree with you that shouldn't be interrupted. I think the text at the start is smart of what has happened, but at the end, it wasn't needed. Like, you could have just had that, especially because the shot was so beautiful as well.
It's basically the shot that the film begins and ends with. It does look amazing. It's great that the credits play over it, especially because, again, bringing it back, the context of that specifically being Eastwood coming back and then fading out. It's like him saying goodbye to the genre that helped basically launch his career and popularize him. Clint Eastwood has done a lot of films that could serve as a finale to his career. It's not going to happen until he actually dies, and he is 90. But this is very much one of Clint Eastwood's best as a director. If this was what he left out on, it would have been a great final one. What do you think of him as a director?
I think he's a talented director.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of same kind of story he tells. He's very much gone back on himself as an actor at quite a few points. Whether that's a bad thing or not, I don't know. I mean, the films are still well made and they're well directed, and I don't find them always as interesting anymore. The ones he did first were such great films, and he was quite connected to a lot of those genres, or wasn't the main focus. I almost forgot he directed it, but I think that's partially what I'm bringing into the film. If you watch those films not being a fan of Clint Eastwood already, and it's less obvious that he's done them. I think they are still like really solid, great films, but a lot of them seem to be a lot more about the old man character getting dragged into something, as opposed to the variants that you had in his films.
Also done so many like true story movies, so many American themes.
I do find some of them overly patriotic.
I feel like he's one of those filmmakers that does have a tendency to be more quantity over quality. As impressive as it is that he can churn out so many movies, especially at his age, I don't think he's made a masterpiece in a long time. Some of his work in the 2000s was really, really good. Gran Torino, Mystic River especially, I think is an amazing movie. So that's one of his best films by far. Have you seen Mystic River?
I've not seen Mystic River. I've seen Gran Torino. I've seen $1 Million Baby, obviously.
Yeah. And that's a great film too. I would highly recommend this movie.
I think it's a must-watch film. Even if you're not a fan of the Western going into it, it's different enough that if you're not a fan of the Western anyway, you can still find something to enjoy in it. It would give you an interesting introduction into the Western genre. If you've seen a Clint Eastwood Western before, that would benefit you going into this one. I think watching it blind, I'd still recommend it. It's just one of those films that I think everyone should watch. I honestly think it should be taught in film schools alongside like Citizen Kane and all that kind of stuff. It should be in that kind of conversation. For me, it's a quintessential piece of cinema.
On the next episode, we're going to be doing a two-parter, moving away slightly from the darkness into more comedic territory with a double bill of Ben Stiller directed comedies, The Cable Guy and Tropic Thunder. We will see you.